Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today is our last interview for the interview series we've been working on for KinkFest. I'm so excited to talk today with Evie Vane. I can't believe, again, that it's already our last episode, but I am so very much excited. Today's conversation is going to be based around rope bondage, and rope bondage bottoming. So I think just to start, Evie Vane, if you wouldn't mind maybe introducing yourself and giving a little bit of background on your experience in kink and your experience as a kink educator.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. So I started in kink about 7 years ago, and I was already in my 40s by that point, so I was kind of a late bloomer. And right away, I loved rope bottoming. It called to me. And I started, looking around to see ways that I could get better. And there were hardly any resources for rope bottoms. So after a while, I started like doing research in different areas and things, and I wrote a little guide, and it's called The Little Guide to Getting Tied Up. And it was meant actually just to be a little guide for my own rope bottoming community in San Francisco to prevent injuries because I got nerve damage. People I was seeing were getting nerve damage, and I thought, oh, I'll just write this little thing. And then people were like, oh, well, you should put it on Amazon. And when's the paperback coming out? And it just kind of took off from there. And I just came out with another book called Better Bondage for Everybody last August. And that is a compilation of lots of rope bottoming and beyond rope bottoming writings from experts all over the world. And I teach some rope bottoming classes. And I write blog posts about rope bottoming, and I'm really active in my local community. I just love it. I'm super passionate about rope bottoming, and I could talk about it all day. So,
Yeah, definitely. I think your book, the first one that you wrote, Little Guide to Getting Tied Up, that was one of my first introductions to a book about rope bottoming. I think it's probably still one of the only books out there about it. I think since you kind of started that, it really opened up the conversation around rope bottoming. There have definitely been more writings about it, but that was my first exposure to it, and it was so helpful. And so anybody who's listening to this and wants to learn more and kind of continue their journey, that it's a great place to start. And then Better Bondage for Everybody is also great. And I think it really just ties into so many of the conversations that I've been having in these interviews, but also just the community in general is having about, being the right rope bottom or being good enough to be a rope bottom and all of that stuff. So maybe a good place to start our conversation here would be what are some myths and misconceptions that you think pop up frequently for people who want to get started in rope bondage but are maybe discouraged because of their age or their size or what they perceive rope bondage to be like or be about?
yeah, there's so many misconceptions, and not even just among newbies, but among rope tops who have been doing this for a while. One of the biggest ones is you're too big to be tied, and even you're too big to be suspended. And there's a great article on remedialropes.com called BDSM Bullshit Who Can Be Suspended. And you'll find that really body size doesn't have a whole lot to do with it. It's really rigor knowledge and experience doing that. So maybe somebody doesn't have the experience or the knowledge to do that, but it doesn't mean it's not possible. So that's a huge misconception. And also that there's just one way to be a rope bottom. I think a lot of people look at FetLife or Facebook or fetish magazines or whatever it is, and they see these rope bottoms doing crazy intense suspensions. And they think, well, I'm not a good rope bottom if I can't do that, or that's where I want to be someday. And it's okay if you want to have like intentions and goals, but you can do rope bottoming without any skills at all, right now, pretty much in whatever condition you're in. You just have to find a kind of rope style of play that supports the way you are and the way your body is. So there really is like a rope bondage for just about everybody out there. And you don't have to do something that you see somebody else doing.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely true. And I think a lot of the confusion does definitely stem from the perception we get of rope bondage being presented as an art form, because it is something very beautiful to photograph, but most of the people who bought them and who are doing photographs are models who are extremely fit and extremely flexible and do this as part of their job. So they get paid to do it.
Yeah.
And there's also a lot of people who have larger bodies or who have different levels of ability who get tied up as well. But especially until very recently, all you saw was the, tall but not too tall, really fit but not too bulky, very like almost traditional model-esque people getting tied up. And so everybody thought, well, I have to be that way. And it doesn't, again, I'm going to just state this because I think it is really important to emphasize. You don't have to be in any particular place to get started. You don't have to have a goal of being that size or being that flexible or being able to do a certain kind of tie. It's what works for you. And if I can just offer a personal example here, something that I've learned is that I can't be suspended from TKs because of my nerve location and just how high it is on my arm and how close it is to the skin. And I've just had to learn that there's a lot of ties that my body cannot do, and it's important to listen to what your body can do and then work with the rigger who's able to work around that and isn't going to see it as, well, I suppose they can see it as a challenge, but not as a negative. Like, oh, like, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I have to, like, you shouldn't have to, like, apologize for the state that your body is in to the person you're being, doing a ties with.
Absolutely not. And, even a lot of those, I don't want to say ideal, but those, typical, stereotypical model type bodies and people who are getting tied, when you see them, what you don't realize is pretty much everybody has some kind of limitation. Even like some very well-known rope bottoms who get photographed all the time and teach and, are very popular, they have their limitations too. They just work around them. So you don't see those in whatever photo that they're doing. I certainly have limitations all over the place.
Mm-hmm. And as well, a lot of times the ties you see and it's like, oh my god, I can't believe I can't do something like that. It must be like an awful rope bondage bottom. Well, as it turns out, they're probably only in that tie for like a minute to take a photo, and then they go right back down. Obviously,
Exactly.
especially people who do live performances are in those ties for longer. But a lot of times, if it's strictly seeing something in a photo, you're like, oh, why can't I do that? Well, maybe they can't either. They're just holding it in
Right.
as best they can. Pretty, yeah. And there's something wrong with that.
No, and that's just a different kind of scene. When you take those photos, you don't have to do something that's even beautiful to have a great scene, right? Like what makes a great scene is how well you enjoy it and how well your partner enjoys it.
Definitely. I think that's something to definitely keep in mind as well is focus on the connection. If you're not taking a photo, don't worry about it looking beautiful as long as it feels beautiful. I don't know if that's too cheesy. But it is about forming a connection, and that's something actually I would love to get your opinion about the phrase connective rope. Uh, because it's something that I've like. It's like people who are interested in getting started in um, rope bondage. A lot of times people will use this phrase. I only do connective rope. I'm seeking connective experiences when I do rope. But at least as I can see it, isn't that something that we should all be seeking in some way? The connection can be different, obviously, but aren't most people usually attempting to find some kind of connection with another human being when they're having an experience like rope bondage?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think in general, just today, everybody is peripheralized and we're all sort of hungry for connection. But, you can find connection in lots of little ways all throughout your day. It doesn't have to be this big, overwhelming, like intimate experience. You can make
Mm-hmm.
eye contact with the checkout person and, just say, oh, your hair looks awesome. That's a connection. So when people talk about connection and rope bondage, as being like the be all and end all, I, that is not my own take on things, right? Like you can have those wonderful, intimate, super connective experiences, but you can also have something that's like playful and is not super intense and intimate. Or you could have something that is cathartic where it's super painful maybe and you cry and you get something out And you don't necessarily need to snuggle with the rope top for a half an hour afterward. There's so many reasons to do rope bondage, and they're all valid. So I'm certainly not gonna say the connection is bad. It's great, and it's if that's what you want. But it doesn't, there are no shoulds in rope bondage, I feel like. If somebody's telling you that, your rope isn't connective enough, well, then what they're saying is it's not connective enough for me. And that person maybe needs to find somebody else who has a more connective style. But it's certainly not the only one true way, to do rope bondage.
That's definitely very true. Again, there is no one way. There's the way that works for you, and that's the way that you should be focusing on and finding partners that you can mesh with on that particular level.
Exactly.
What I want to ask about is kind of going back to one of the previous things we were talking about in terms of starting out as a rope bondage bottom. I know a lot of people in my audience are oftentimes exploring this for the first time with people who are also new to rope bondage, not necessarily, going to a rope jam and then meeting the top who's been doing this for 15 years and like having a scene with them, but doing it with their partner at home who's probably also new or maybe has only done it with one other partner before. Are there any good things that the bottom in that situation in particular should work on cultivating as they're getting started in order to, one, be safe, but then also have an enjoyable experience and be able to communicate effectively about what they're experiencing?
Sure. I mean, just knowing your body will go a long way. But I think if you're going to be tying with somebody who's brand new, it's also good to be tying with people who do know what they're doing so that you know what something is supposed to feel like. Because it's very hard, when somebody's brand new, you don't know what it's supposed to feel like. They don't know what it's supposed to look like or, how it's supposed to be applied. But knowing your body in general and trusting your instinct if something doesn't feel right. If it doesn't feel right, it's not right. And it doesn't matter if the person is doing it, quote unquote, right. If it doesn't feel right to you, then it's not right. So even just acknowledging that to yourself can go a long way if you're working with somebody who's new. But I would always recommend that unless you're doing something like, just learning like a single column tie or, something very like easy and not too strenuous, I would recommend trying to learn in person, wherever possible. There are some great videos out there, like no question, but learning in person when you're brand new is really, really valuable because you can not only get that immediate feedback from somebody who does know what they're doing, but you can see other people in your class if you're in a class and not a private one-on-one session. And, there's not even like, you don't have to spend a ton of money. There's peer rope workshops in a lot of cities. There's rope bite, there's some rope jams that cost $10 or $15 to go to. So there's lots of ways to actually learn rope bottoming and rope topping in person without spending a ton of money. And you get to meet people, which is, I mean, right? I could go on and on about how important community is for rope bottoms.
Yeah, and I think just for rope in general, I think it's really important. Like, and it's interesting to me actually, in comparison to the rest of the BDSM community, the sheer volume of events that are dedicated to rope bondage outside of just having a play party, like all of the different skill sharing events, all of the classes. There's really, if you're interested in getting started in rope bondage, and in particular if you're living on the West Coast of the United States, there are sometimes, like, at least where I live, even in one city, there'll be 3 or 4 events on the weekend and then 2 or 3 during the week. So really, there's a lot of resources out there to learn. And even if you are somebody who is more experienced, and people who are more experienced may already realize this, but it is also very good to just go to classes just to troubleshoot and be like, hey, we've been doing this one tie, we're looking to be able to kind of make this one thing more sustainable. Do you have any advice on maybe how we could do that or a different way of doing this particular tie? Because something that you'll learn. And if you're doing a tie that doesn't feel right to you, maybe the way that it's being tied is different or less sustainable for your body. There's more than one way to tie a futomomo. Like there's different ways you can approach the same thing and figure out how to make it work for you. And being able to go to those classes is a really great way of figuring out different ways of being able to work around your different levels of ability and different, skill sets and just what works for you.
Absolutely. And, again, like tying with different people, you'll get to experience that futomomo as many different ways as there are people, probably. And, there's a great, FetLife has a lot of great resources for newbies also, for new rope bottoms and new rope tops. But for the rope bottoms, there's the group Ask a Rope Bottom. There's the Rope Bottoms Roundtable. I also just started a new Google group for rope bottoms called Rope Bottoms Share Space. And we have almost 600 people. And it's mostly, well, it started out as being mostly about vetting tops, but there's all kinds of topics, related to newbies to advanced rope bottoming questions. So if any rope bottoms out there want to join the Rope Bottoms Share group on Google, they can just email me. I'm super easy to find. My name is the same everywhere, like on Facebook and FetLife and Instagram. So I'm really easy to find. So you can just private message me and I'll put you on it. It's super helpful.
Yeah, super helpful. Yeah, Evie Vane, pretty much ever. Not to be confused with me, Evie Lupine. But eventually you'll hopefully they'll be able to figure out which one is which. But actually that reminds me of something I wanted to make sure to bring up, and that is for people who are bottoms who are solo or maybe who just have a relationship style that allows them to seek outside partners if they want to get started in a rope and find people. One, how do you approach somebody for play? And two, how do you make sure that person is safe to play with in the first place?
Wow, those two questions could probably each take an hour on their own. So I'll try to.
Yeah, quick
Try to
summary.
be
Or you guys could just read Evie Vane's previous books and get the full story.
Well, even that, I feel like I only skimmed the surface because there's just so much to say about it. And so many people have different approaches, like for me, if there's somebody I want to play with, maybe I've seen their photos on FetLife or I've seen them in person or we're going to be at a conference together or whatever it is. The first thing is making an honest connection and not having this sense of entitlement. I think the worst thing you can do is just feel like somebody owes you the honor of being tied up, or whatever it is. I think a lot of bottoms, they come into this, and I know I did actually. So this is coming from firsthand experience. The very first night I walked into a dungeon, it looked kind of almost like little, not booths, but little stations where people were doing things. And there was a rigger suspending somebody, and I thought, I want to do that. I want to do that so badly. And when he was untying his bottom, I went over and I was like, could you do me next? Like, I was just like, why not? I'm so into this. And then I, realized like rope tops are not vending machines, they're people. And there has to be for them, some motivation, whether it's attraction or they want a challenge or whatever it is. And, it really helps to figure out what moves them and see if that appeals to you. So, maybe somebody is a very sexual kind of rope player and you're not, like, you don't want to have anything to do with sex with your rope. Well, then that's not a good person to approach. So the first thing I would say when you're trying to approach somebody is see what their style is and see if it matches yours, as opposed to like trying to make it work if it's not intrinsically a good fit. And then, be humble about it. If somebody says no or they act like they're not interested, you could maybe feel them out. Like sometimes people are a little shy and they're going to say no when they might say yes later. So, but you have to know when it's just like, it's really a no, and not be like entitled and pushy about it. I do very well being, a bit flirty, I'm super complimentary because why not? Like, why wouldn't you compliment somebody whose work you love? And, I try to make it easy for them. I would say, like, oh, we're both going to be at this conference. Maybe if you have a little time. And, also I found persistence goes a long way in the idea that if somebody says no, or like maybe they say yes, but then it doesn't happen for whatever reason, you've at least gotten your foot in the door, so to speak, to set something up for a future time. There's plenty of people that I really, really wanted to tie with, and they're popular. And we had kind of set something up and said, maybe we'll make this happen. But then they got too busy on the dungeon night or whatever. But then there was another event like, a couple months later, and I got to tie with them. So persistence goes a long way, but also knowing, when it's really not a good fit.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I think my first thought while I'm thinking that is I think it is definitely a really great idea to be complimentary to a rope top, because while you're doing that, you're showing interest, but you're showing specific interest in what you like about them as a top and why you like their play, because obviously they want to know, okay, well, what's the deal? Like, why why do you want to tie with me? Is it just because I have a bag full of rope, or is it something
Right.
specifically about me that you enjoy? Because I think there is this almost like really like weird dynamic between like specifically within the rope community of how like rope tops and rope bottoms interact with each other, where it happens in the like the rest of the BDSM community too, but in particular it can kind of seem like, oh my god, there's the top in the room who's doing rope bondage, and then they get like flooded with people who all want to play with them, and they can get to be a lot of times like they're just being treated like service tops, and not all of them necessarily want to have that particular energy in their scenes, or just don't know why people want to tie with them, or know if that person even would mesh with them well during a scene, other than the fact that they both presumably like rope.
Right. Exactly. And yeah, I mean, again, like we do have to remember that tops are people too. And, they want to be desired and not just used the same way we as rope bottoms want to be desired and not, well, I don't know, maybe some of us want to be well used, but that's something different than like, just using somebody.
And then my follow-up question to that, or my follow-up thought to that, would be, as a newer rope bottom, how do you avoid just being starstruck by all of the amazing riggers, and how to kind of how to combat that? Because I feel like there's, again, specifically with rope bondage, I think there tends to be almost a very heightened sub frenzy, because a lot of rope bondage tops have a level of fame, or sometimes even infamy, that a lot of other categories of BDSM don't necessarily have to deal with, on top of the fact that the person in question is a top. And especially if they're older and experienced, you start layering these things on, I think it's a lot easier to end up in a situation. It's maybe not necessarily dangerous, but it's almost a lot of times like trying to negotiate with somebody you have a reverence for, and you're kind of not necessarily putting yourself on the best footing if you start off that way, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, for sure. And, it's easy to see why that happens, why we put certain riggers on a pedestal. And the reason is that what they do, the ones who are really good at it, it's really hard, right? It takes a lot of training and a lot of experience. Well, some people say they can suspend somebody, after one class, and maybe they can do something very simple. But to do the kinds of things that like most rope bottoms see, in photos or in performances and things, to find somebody to do that, there are way more rope bottoms than there are tops who can do that. And so it's very easy to see this one person who wants 50 people to play with them. And, you know, of course you're going to put that person on a pedestal, and it's super dangerous to do that because, as you said, immediately you're putting yourself in a position where you're not equal to that person, which means you might not speak up if something doesn't feel right because you want to be pleasing to this famous rigger. You want to do like a good job. You don't want to be complaining. So already you're putting yourself in a bit of a dangerous position. And not only that, but you're putting yourself in a dangerous position emotionally because, as we've seen, unfortunately, there are people who take advantage of people. And the rope scene is no less, that's no less true in the rope scene than any other, BDSM or in the world. It's just what people do. And so you have these young, inexperienced people coming in and worshiping these, experienced, highly specialized tops. And that's just a recipe for something bad to happen. And it has.
Yes, unfortunately, it is something, and it's just like you said, it's something that's happening not just in the rope community, but in the larger BDSM community and just the world in general. It seems like is really waking up to all of these consent violations or consent injuries that have been happening and have been kind of swept under the rug or gone unnoticed because the person has a level of fame, or has a reputation that precedes them. And it's just important to kind of recognize that and be aware of that if you're getting started in the rope bondage community or getting started in the BDSM community in general. To get multiple opinions and get personal vetting of that person. Don't just assume that because they're really well known that they're a safe person to play with or a good partner or somebody that you're going to be compatible with or somebody who takes all of the proper safety precautions for a scene or listens to safe words or any of that, myriad number of things that can go wrong in a scene or that can cause a scene to not be good for you.
Absolutely. And I want to add, even though we haven't been using gender specific language at all, I want to add for the non-female people who are listening to this that the stereotype is that this kind of dynamic, this bad dynamic only happens between like younger girls and older men. And it's absolutely not true. There are predatory female rope tops and gender nonconforming rope tops as well, and trans rope tops. So it's not just this like male female stereotypical dynamic. So really everybody sort of needs to be aware that this is happening.
Yeah, and I mean it could definitely go the other way where the submissive is being coercive towards the dominant, but that's something that we have not experienced on the same scale as dominants having consent injuries with their submissives and them being the catalyst of that. So it's just something to be aware of. And I know I've talked extensively already, both in previous interviews and on my channel generally, about how to go into a scene with the most safety possible and how to negotiate with the most safety possible. Just doing the best practices for that. So I don't necessarily want to spend a lot of time doing that here because I think while it is a really important conversation, I think it's one that also it takes a really long time to kind of explain that fully. I don't necessarily know if we have time to get through each and every little iota of what you could do to like be as safe as possible before you go into a scene. But I think ultimately what's really important is that if you do end up in a situation like that, please don't be afraid to speak out. Please don't be afraid to go to other people in the community for help. Please just don't be silent about it and don't suffer alone. If something like that does happen, there are dozens and hundreds of other people, if not more, who have been going through the same thing that you are, and it's important to just feel like you have to stomach it because oh well it's like this big famous like rope top, and if I say something I'll ruin my reputation and nobody will want to play with me anymore, or they think that like I'm topping from the bottom or whatever, like at least in my opinion I don't think that's something good to focus on in that particular moment. But
Yeah, I mean, people should feel free to reach out. There's, especially since we started the Rope Bottom Share group, I've just heard story after story about people who didn't say anything for so long, or they did say something to one person and they weren't believed, or they said something to multiple people and they weren't believed. And now that's changing quite a bit. People are being believed more. And there is a lot more support and many more resources for people who have been through experiences like that. So I really do, yeah, I totally agree. I encourage people to reach out to someone they trust to get help.
But maybe going back a little, because this is definitely very, like, darker topic, shall we say. And while it is a very important one for sure, I would like to also ask about your experience, maybe an advice you could give specifically about being somebody who's older and getting started. I know I have, a lot of, I'm younger, first of all, so I got started not at rope bondage specifically until a little bit later when I was already involved in BDSM, but I'm still in my 20s, so it's not unusual for somebody my age to be new to rope bondage. I don't necessarily think it's unusual for somebody in their 40s or 50s to get started per se, um, but I think a lot of people are struggling with one, feeling like they've lost time because they didn't get started earlier, and then also just feeling like, well, I'm not like, again, that like young, beautiful, like stereotypical perfect rope bunny, shall we say, in air quotes. Will people want to play with me? Will people find me appealing? Like, does age really matter in your experience, or has that caused any difficulty for you personally, or just generally? What's your experience and opinion on that?
Yeah, so first, I am one of those people who feel like they wasted a lot of time or like, got very late on the boat. And so when I started in my 40s, I really went hog wild and I was trying everything, and it's like that proverbial kid in a candy store thing. And I was trying so hard to be appealing. Like I lost a little weight. Like I started exercising more. I really did all those typical things that people do to be conventionally appealing. And I feel like I'm a little unique in that I don't quite look my age. Most people think I'm a lot younger than I am. So I'm super lucky because I got blessed genetically that way. So in the beginning, when I was doing rope bondage and I was trying so hard to be pleasing in a conventional way, I didn't have any trouble finding rope partners. I mean, there were a few people who were just like, I mean, they didn't say it, but I could tell they were just like, not even giving me the time of day. So obviously there was like something going on there when they're tying like only 22-year-old, 90-pound girls and they won't even look at me. But I really didn't have any trouble. When I started having trouble was when I got being more selective. And I also got a little bit lazier at some point, and I just stopped like really trying so hard because, I got more selective. And, when that happened, I definitely noticed that it was harder to find people to tie me up. But there are people who, there's people who start doing suspensions in their 60s. And I think what it's really all about is who do you want to tie with and what kind of experience do you want to have? And I will say that if you do want to tie with one of these super popular rope tops who is being inundated with, young, hot rope bottoms, and you are an older, bigger bodied person, whatever it is, you are going to have a little bit of a harder time with those people. So what I would encourage people to do is just to find people who are open to tying people like them. And there are plenty of rope tops like that. They just might not be. I mean, and there are certainly some of the popular and well-known, like really, really amazing riggers who do tie people of all ages and body types and genders, but there are some who don't, and they have a very specific, sort of niche taste in rope bottoms, and they're allowed to have that the same way that we can have our taste in rope tops. But it does make it harder if you want to tie with those people. So I'm not going to lie about that, but I would just not let it discourage you. There are plenty of people who want to tie, people of, all types. And if you concentrate on those people, then you'll be less disappointed than if you're trying to reach for somebody who intrinsically is really not interested in tying someone of your type.
Basically, don't beat your head against the wall about, why can't
Yeah.
I tie with this one person? Don't get hung up on this one person. And I think that's just a good life skill to have, is if it's not meant to be, it's not going to happen. So spend your energy making things that will happen, go better.
Yeah, and don't take it personally. Like, everybody has something to bring to the table. And, everybody has their strengths, and there's going to be somebody out there who will adore you and appreciate your strengths. And there's no sense in really keeping knocking on the door of somebody who is not going to appreciate you the way you deserve.
So something else that we want to make sure that we talk about is, again, for people who are kind of getting started in this or interested in exploring it, there's obviously a lot of different terminology that people use who, if they're not familiar with rope bondage, are going like, what the hell are you people talking about? What is a TK? Like, what are these words?
Yeah.
And in order to kind of be able to get started, are there any things specifically that you think, terminology wise, that people should familiarize themselves with, so when they get started they can have a good time and kind of know what they're getting themselves into, so that way, if they say, hey, I'm brand new, I've like tied like 2 times before, like what kind of scene are we going to be doing, they don't get lost in the negotiation and not understand what's going on.
Yeah, I think it's really good to familiarize yourself just with the basic styles of bondage. There's Ichinawa, which is no knots at all. It's just a connective one rope technique. There's Hojujitsu, which is, that takedown style, which can be like really gnarly if you've if you haven't done rope bondage before, and like you're suddenly getting thrown to the floor and tied in maybe a little bit dangerous ways. There's Kinbaku and Shibari are the Japanese styles, and a lot of them involve very carefully placed rope, and it's more beautiful, sometimes more sadistic. Seminawa, sadistic. So it's good to familiarize yourself with like the types of, the styles of tying, and also just some basic ties, learn what a hog tie is and an ebi and a TK. There's plenty of resources for rope tops out there. So, just pick up a book and glance and see what the basic ties are. So that can all help you when you're communicating with somebody. And learn basic anatomy, so it's easier to communicate. If you don't know what your shin is, and you're doing futomomos and it hurts, like, it's a lot easier to say like, well, the lower wrap on my left shin, than just like, ow, my leg hurts. And then they have to figure out what you mean by that. So learn basic anatomy.
We've already mentioned remedial ropes, but it's a great resource if you're looking to be able to find more from the perspective of somebody, who wants a self-suspension, but then also has just extensive medical knowledge, and then also like does a lot of stuff with rope bondage. It's a great resource online for being able to find a lot of these terms and being able to look at stuff like, nerve locations and anatomy and stuff like that. Because I think, at least in my experience, one of the most valuable skills to have as a rope bondage bottom is being able to communicate clearly about what's going on, and just learning the ability to be self-aware with your body is a great place to start, because again, it's maybe not even necessarily so much a lack of knowing what to call something, but like not being able to clearly identify it. Like, okay, where is it on your body? What type of sensation is it? How intense is it? Is it something that's going to be sustainable or not? Is it more of like a digging in type of sensation, a pinching sensation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Like, use as much language as you need to be able to describe something other than ow, that hurts, because there's a lot of other follow-up questions the rigger is going to have to ask you to that to figure out what's going on, or if you need to change anything, because maybe ow is a good thing and you're trying to get there in the scene, and you need to be able to differentiate between good ow and bad ow.
Right. And I do want to point out also that if, ow, that hurts, or ow, that's bad is all you can manage, that is still 1,000 times better than not saying anything. So if that's all you can manage, like, kudos to you, like, pat yourself on the back. You did a great thing by speaking up. And, your rope top will figure it out from there. And I've said that myself. I've been like, left side, I don't know, really hurts, and because, you get into subspace, right? Don't know, can fix it.
Something I would want to talk about as well is subspace and rope. And one, I think the desire for a lot of people to be able to reach that space and getting frustrated over not being able to do it and kind of treating it like the goal of a scene. And then as well, like how to sort of balance between being able to maintain a really good subspace, but then still being like aware enough to communicate with your partner, especially because in rope bondage, a lot of times you are very, you know, limited in terms of your options in a lot of ways for communication, depending on the tie. Like a lot of times, if you're just doing like other kinds of BDSM when you're not completely tied up, there's a lot more options for like physical cues you can give. Even if you're in subspace, you're not really able to verbalize stuff that maybe you don't have access to when you're, you know, tied up and several feet in the air.
For sure. Subspace is like a super complicated topic, and I'll try to make it as easy as possible for, newer people. And also, I called it subspace in the first book, and then in the second book I switched to rope space, which is more accurate because not everybody who gets tied up is submissive, right? And subspace, sub stands for submission. So I'm going to call it rope space and just say that, lab time is a great thing. We as bottoms, well, actually, I don't even know if you are a bottom, but as a bottom, I have bottom for a lot of tops while they're learning things. But it took me 6 years to say, can we try this for me? Like, so I can learn how my body reacts in something. And, and you can even do that with rope space. You can go into it slowly. But I do think that there is this overwhelming emphasis unnecessarily on rope space being the goal. I've talked to a lot of rope bottoms who never get there. I've had great scenes where I don't get there, and it took a long time for me to understand that there are a lot of reasons to do rope, and you can feel great and be connected or not connected or whatever you want to get out of a scene without ever getting to rope space. And so I think, if that's something that you want, then you can certainly research how to get there. But if you don't get there, you shouldn't feel bad about yourself. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, there is the stereotype of like rope space being all like, I'm floaty, I'm not here. And for me, that's true. But rope space is different for everybody. And again, just learning how your body responds and how you communicate, like, do you go nonverbal? And if so, then you have to work out ahead of time, hand signals or have something that you drop or, have a response. Like if you don't give a certain response, then they take you down. So know how rope space is for you. But even like when I go into really, really, really deep rope space, I do always have just, a tiny bit of my consciousness paying attention. And I don't know if there is anybody who completely trusts their rope top, to the point that, because rope tops aren't mind readers, and most people know that, so there's no way, even if they're doing hand checks and all these kinds of things, there's no way for a rope top to know what is going on in your body unless you communicate that somehow, whether that's like, a physical gesture or a word or something else. They can't tell just by looking at you. So I really would encourage everyone to, figure out a way that they can keep one teeny little part of their consciousness on, what's going on with their body to avoid getting nerve damage and other kinds of injuries.
Definitely. I think something as well I've been thinking of while we're talking about this is for people who have never experienced rope space or subspace before while in rope, is there any advice that you would give them for kind of being able to recognize when it happens? Because if you've never experienced it before, you're not going to necessarily know, what's going to cause it, if anything's going to cause it at all, or because it hasn't happened before, to know how to negotiate for how to handle it when it does happen. How would you kind of communicate that other than just saying I'm like, getting into subspace? What would maybe be some good ways of being able to communicate that or know how to manage it?
Yeah. Well, for one thing, so recognizing rope space for somebody who hasn't been in it, You know, for me, it's just that moment when I have completely let go of all of my thoughts, you know, that like monkey mind hamster wheel of thoughts going on in my head, and everything is just okay. It's like a big sigh of relief. It's just like, ah, there it is. And now here I am. I'm totally present with my partner. I'm totally present with this sensation, and I'm not thinking about anything else except how awesome it is right here in this moment. I mean, there's a lot of, you know, there's a cocktail of chemicals that go into making that happen. You know, there's all kinds of endorphins and adrenaline and oxytocin and all these kinds of things that are affecting our body. And, you know, for some people, rope space is like being on, you know, morphine. It's a really, really powerful thing. So that's one way to recognize it. And then, oh gosh, I lost like, what was the second part of the question?
How to communicate when it's happening to your partner if you didn't negotiate about what to do if it happened to begin with.
Yeah, well, I think that actually when somebody goes into rope space, it's a little bit more obvious than, you know, maybe other things that are happening to your body because, you know, people really do, they look blissed out, you know. If I'm tying with somebody and we haven't like talked about rope space at all, I, you know, will usually say like, I might not be able to talk so well in a couple minutes, you know, or I'm getting a little floaty. You know, you can just like, even if you just like smile and you start talking a little bit slower, your rope top is going to pick up on something, you know. So I think, but you know, again, just trying to use your voice before you get to that point where you can't communicate. You know, there, if you feel yourself slipping into that like happy space, you can certainly say, "Hey, I'm going there."
Yeah, and even if it's something you haven't experienced before, at least, in most people's rope space that I've heard of, it's not so much an on-off switch; it's kind of like a fading out. So you should kind of be able to tell a little bit when you're not quite completely there yet, and be able to communicate that. But ultimately, I do think a lot of people like it's visually obvious when you know what state their brain is in. You know, kind of real everyday brain on versus rope space brain on.
Yeah, and if anybody gets a chance to look up Neuromancer 28, he teaches classes and he's got a FetLife profile and he's got a chapter in my Better Bondage book. He's done, so he's a neuroscientist, and so he's done brain scans of, you know, people in rope and in suspensions, and it's pretty amazing actually what happens to your brain. It's a fascinating sort of study. So it'd be great if like somebody is curious about what happens and, you know, the stages of getting into rope space. That's a really great resource.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm actually part of me wants to know like be in the room when that happened and just figure out how they did that because that is so fascinating to me that somebody actually worked out how to be able to do that and make a study of it. I think that's going to be so helpful for a lot of people figuring out who just curious and want to know how the brain works. And then also, you know, more information is always better.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so something else I would want to talk about today in relation to rope bondage is if you don't currently have a partner or you're not currently tying with anybody or for some reason something in your life is getting in your way of tying with other people or maybe you just don't feel like it at the moment, what are some ways that a rope bottom can cultivate their own skills independently of having a partner so that eventually if or when they do start tying with other people again they're not rusty or maybe they just have like a more fleshed out skill set even though they've been independent of a partner or not tying for some time.
Any rope bottom can certainly access all of the resources for rope tops, you know, to learn how to self tie, or you can volunteer to be a bottom for people in classes. You know, there's a lot of times believe it or not, there's rope tops who don't have partners as well and want to learn these things. So even just, it's obviously not scening when you bottom for somebody in classes, but it's a great way to, keep that rope feel while you're looking for somebody to do scenes with. And, self-suspending is like way more popular than it ever was. It's grown by leaps and bounds. And so you can even learn how to do that a lot more easily than you could even just 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, again, there's a lot of online resources for people to go to just to read more. There's tons of books. There's tons of places to get inspiration online and just kind of, stay abreast of what's going on in the rope bondage world, even if you're not currently part of it. And a great way of being able to uh, still do rope bondage, even if you're not currently partnered with somebody, is definitely demo bottoming or just, volunteering for a class or just being involved some way in a rope jam or a something rope community related can be a really great way of doing that. And yeah, again, not all rope
Oh, and
tops are partnered.
conferences.
Yes, definitely
Yeah,
conferences.
like, oh my gosh, there's so many more conferences now. There's Bondage Expo Dallas, Bondage Expo Denver, there's Ropecraft in Chicago and San Antonio. There's Bound in Boston. There's like so many conferences now, and a lot of them have rope bottoming tracks, and so many people go without partners. And, maybe you meet somebody, maybe you just kind of like immerse yourself in rope culture and you don't even tie with anybody, but oh my gosh, there's such a great resource. I'm a big fan of rope conferences.
Oh yeah, they're great. I mean, because it's like you get to devote that whole weekend to, learning new things, meeting people, just kind of being immersed in the culture, and especially if maybe, you're from somewhere where there's not a big, rope culture, being able to have that weekend just completely surrounded by it can be great. And it's honestly, I don't really think there's any downsides to it other than having to pay for the plane ticket potentially or the hotel rooms, like.
Mm-hmm.
Such a great experience, and actually, this will be up after it's already done. But Ropecraft San Antonio is the first weekend of March, so it's like there's the continuous cycle almost all year. There's always something going on: spring, summer, fall, winter. Somewhere in the United States, there's probably a rope bondage convention going on that weekend or shortly thereafter. It seems like.
Yeah. Or even if it's not like a total, it's not just dedicated to rope. Most conferences, kink related conferences, have some kind of rope track now. Like, Kinkfest has some great rope classes. I'm so excited about going to Kinkfest, by the way.
Yes, yes.
So yeah, so you don't even have to look just at the rope specific conferences, but kink conferences in general. Rope bondage has gotten so much more popular, and classes for rope bottoms too.
Like I was at, so it's actually funny because I was actually at a like small local like leather conference about 2 years ago now, and there were two rope bondage classes there. Like it was like old school leather community people, and there were still rope bondage classes there. So it's by no means something that's completely isolated. Although obviously, if your life is rope bondage, you'll probably get more out of it if you're going to a solo like only rope focused convention. But if you're just curious and you want to get started, or maybe you just like rope bondage, you like a lot of other things too. A lot of of the more general BDSM conferences will usually have a couple classes about it, or at least somebody there, even if they're not teaching a class on rope bondage. That's part of their repertoire and part of something that they do teach. So it can just be a really great way to connect with people who are educators in that particular field and go to some of their classes and learn stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah, was there anything that you wanted to put out there before we start wrapping things up today?
The only thing I wanted to say is that, and I emphasize this in my classes too, is that I want every rope bottom to remember that they're perfect exactly as they are. And we talk about all of these things, ways to get better. And it's so easy to get down on yourself and say, like, I'm still not good enough. Like, no, you are where you are. And, if you have your goals and your intentions, that's fine. But just remember that, like, where you are right now is where you're meant to be. And
Mm-hmm.
you're perfect just as you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think especially if somebody's interested in getting tied is on the more submissive side, it is really easy to get locked up in that like perfectionist mode of I want to be better, I want to be the best, I'm not where I want to be at right now, and just learning to be content with that and learning to accept yourself for where you're at is it's so much better than constantly being in the rat race of trying to be perfect because you'll never be there. You'll never be perfect, and eventually, your goals will happen if they're meant to happen. And just focus on where you're at in the particular moment, not where you want to be in 2 years or 6 years or however long.
Yeah, focus on your strengths because everybody has their unique strengths.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and that's something that's important to go into. In general, like your approach to like if you're approaching a potential play partner, if you're approaching a potential scene, like think about it in terms of what can I offer as opposed to what am I lacking. Like, and does that make sense? Like, if you're thinking constantly about your negatives and the things that you're not good at, you're spending so much time weighed down on the things that you're not good at. You're not focusing on the things that you do know how to do, or the things that you're really passionate about, or the things that you're really curious about, the things that make you motivated to want to do this in the first place.
Exactly.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up. Again, there's like just so much that we could get into here. So maybe we'll have conversations in the future. But for people who want to find more from Evie Vane, again, author of many books, which you will see on the screen now, thanks to podcast editing magic. If people want to check those out, again, what are the names of your books that are out right now, Evie Vane?
Yeah, it's The Little Guide to Getting Tied Up and Better Bondage for Everybody. And they're both available on Amazon and in some bookstores around the country.
And then I'm assuming if you're going to a convention, you probably bring some along to sell as well in case people are planning on going to one of your classes.
I do. And I only have so much room in my suitcase. So I've been selling out and I've started shipping them. So hopefully I will have enough if you ask me for one, but I can't guarantee it.
Mm-hmm. So supplies are limited.
Yes, supplies are limited.
Yeah, and definitely, and you'll be at KingFest, so if people are interested in checking out your books or taking class from you, you'll be there. And again,
Yep.
there will be rope bondage classes at KingFest, so if anybody is interested in learning more about rope bondage, KingFest is a great place to start, especially if you're interested in a wide berth of kink activities. There will be everything from like Consent 101 to rope bondage to blood play to all kinds of stuff in between. I have heard that this will be up later, but at the moment, I think they're getting pretty close to capacity. I'll put links down below if people are interested in checking out more from you and where to buy your books, obviously, but then as well for KingFest in general, because they have been, so great for helping us being able to coordinate these interviews and, just for allowing this opportunity. Want to pimp them out, give them give them some love, and let people know where they can find tickets and information about the classes and things like that. But again, thank you so much, Evie, for being here and sharing your thoughts about rope bondage. Hopefully, if people are interested in finding more, is there a good way that they can contact you or find, more general information from you, social media, stuff like that?
Yeah, they can visit my website, ropebottoming.com. And actually, that's a great way to get in touch with me because the contact form goes right to my email. So I do check social media and I'm on social media quite a bit, but that's actually going to ropebottoming.com is the most expedient way to get a hold of me. And you can learn more about my books. And I think I have a calendar on there. Maybe not, but it's a great way to find out more and reach me.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for sharing all of that. So if people have questions, feel free to go there. If you have questions for me or comments about this interview, please feel free to put them down in the comment section below. Links to everything will be in the description box. And unfortunately, I will not be saying that there will be another interview coming up because this is our last one. But it has been so much fun to talk to you today and such a privilege to get to do this in general. So again, thank you to KingFest, and I will see you all again very soon. Bye-bye.
And thank you all. Bye.